Before we begin, one small thing from one Potter fan to another. This one gets dark before it gets anywhere near the light, so settle in properly. And if you spot the moment everything turns, tell me in the comments, because I want to know if you catch it as early as I did. The chandelier came down first. It fell in the drawing room of Malfoy Manor on a cold night in March 1998. And for about 4 seconds, nobody in that room could see anything at all. Crystal burst across the floor like hail. Somebody screamed. Bellatrix Lestrange threw herself sideways, dragging Hermione Granger with her. And in those 4 seconds, in the dark, Harry Potter reached out and grabbed a wand. In the world we know, his hand closed on Draco Malfoy's wand. Hawthorn, 10 inches, unicorn hair. Harry did not know it at the time. He did not know it for months, but that one grab, made blind, in a room full of falling glass, made him the master of the most dangerous object that has ever existed. In this story, Narcissa Malfoy did something very small. She stepped in front of her son. She was not thinking about wars or wands or prophecies. She heard glass falling in the dark, and she put her body between the noise and her child, the way a mother does without deciding to. And Harry's hand, reaching for Draco, closed on Narcissa's wand instead. Pale elm, slim, cold as a key. He took it. He fought. He ran. He lived. And Draco Malfoy walked out of that drawing room still holding the wand that had disarmed Albus Dumbledore. That is the whole chain. One woman moving one step to the left. Everything you're about to hear for the next 2 hours grows out of it. And I want you to remember, when we get to the very end, that nobody in this story ever finds out that it happened. The escape itself went the way it was always going to go. Dobby the house elf appeared in the cellar and took the prisoners out in pairs. Luna Lovegood and Mr. Ollivander first, then Dean Thomas and the goblin, Griphook. Then Dobby came back for the rest, standing very small in the middle of that enormous room with his chin up. And he brought the whole ceiling down on the Death Eaters. And he took Harry and Ron and Hermione and turned them into nothing. They landed on wet sand at Shell Cottage, and Dobby died there, in Harry's arms, on the edge of the sea. Harry dug his grave by hand. He would not use magic for it. That part does not change. What changes is what happened next in the cellar of Malfoy Manor. 20 minutes later, when Lord Voldemort arrived, he came because Bellatrix had called him. He came expecting to be handed Harry Potter, and instead he was handed a room of frightened adults and a broken ceiling. What he did to them is not something I am going to describe. It is enough to say that Lucius Malfoy did not stand up again that night without help, and that Draco stood against the wall with his hands behind his back and his own wand still tucked in his sleeve, and nobody in that room thought that detail was worth mentioning. Why would they? A boy's school wand, 10 inches, unicorn hair, utterly ordinary. Voldemort left the manor near dawn, and he was angry in a way he had not been for years, and when a man like that is angry, he starts looking for something to blame. That is the second thing you need to hold on to. Because he had a wand of his own now, and it had begun to disappoint him. Let me back up, because this is the part that matters most, and it is the part most people get wrong. Some months earlier, Voldemort had gone looking for a legend. There is a wand in wizarding folklore called the Elder Wand. It has other names. The Death Stick, the Wand of Destiny. The stories say it cannot be beaten, and that it has passed down through centuries of murder and theft, always to the strongest hand. Most wizards think it is a children's tale. Voldemort did not. He hunted it. He followed its trail through a dead wandmaker's memories, and the trail ended at a white marble tomb beside the Hogwarts lake, where Albus Dumbledore had been buried with his wand folded on his chest. Voldemort opened that tomb in the spring of 1998 and took the wand out. And here is the thing about the Elder Wand that Voldemort did not understand, and that cost him everything in the world we know. The wand does not care whose hand it is in. It cares who beat its last owner. Allegiance is won, not inherited. You can dig it out of a grave, and it will still belong to whoever defeated the man in that grave. Dumbledore had been defeated on the Astronomy Tower on a June night in 1997. Not by Severus Snape, who killed him. Before that, a frightened 16-year-old had come up the stairs first and shouted, "Expelliarmus!" And Dumbledore's wand had spun out of his hand into the dark. The wand had belonged to Draco Malfoy ever since. In the world we know, Harry took it off Draco in that dark drawing room and inherited a title he did not want. In this world, he did not. So on the night Voldemort raised the Elder Wand and cast his first spell with it, the wand did what it had been doing quietly for nearly a year. It obeyed him well. It obeyed him beautifully. It just did not obey him completely. For a while, he did not notice. A superb wand in the hand of the most skilled dark wizard alive still tears through walls. But after Malfoy Manor, he noticed. He noticed because he was furious, and because he was casting with everything he had, and because a curse he threw at a marble pillar in the entrance hall of that house cracked it instead of vaporizing it. He stood looking at that crack for a long time. Then he did something Voldemort almost never did. He stopped, and he thought, and he admitted to himself that he might have made a mistake. That is why he won. I want to be honest with you here, because this is the hinge of the entire story. In the world we know, Voldemort worked out that the wand had a previous master far too late. He worked it out at the very end, in the middle of a battle, with an hour left, and he guessed wrong, and the wrong guess killed him. What we are looking at now is what happens when he gets 6 weeks instead of 6 minutes. He went to work like a scholar. He sat in the drawing room of Malfoy Manor with the Elder Wand across his knees, and he made a list of everyone who could have taken it from Dumbledore. It was a short list because the wand's rules are narrow. You have to beat the owner, not kill him. Beat him. Severus Snape had killed Dumbledore. Voldemort considered him first, and in another world, that consideration ended with Snape's death. But Voldemort was not in a hurry now, and when he was not in a hurry, he was careful, and careful men ask a second question. The second question was this: was Dumbledore's wand in his hand when Snape reached him? Voldemort called for the only people who had been on that tower. The Carrows told him what they remembered, which was mostly smoke and shouting. Fenrir Greyback told him nothing useful. And then Draco Malfoy was brought in, and Voldemort looked at him and asked him to describe the night he was given his first real task. Draco said what he had said 100 times, that he had let the Death Eaters into the castle, that he had faced Dumbledore, that in the end Professor Snape had done what he could not do. "Show me," said Voldemort. "There is a branch of magic called legilimency. It is not mind-reading, exactly. It is more like walking into somebody's memory and standing there while it happens around you. A trained wizard can shut a legilimens out. Draco Malfoy at 17 was not that wizard, and he was so tired, and he was so afraid, and the memory came up out of him like water out of a cracked jug. Voldemort saw the tower. He saw the flash of green from the tip of the dark mark. He saw an old man leaning on the battlement, unarmed and calm, and he saw a boy with a shaking hand shout the disarming spell, and he saw Albus Dumbledore's wand fly out into the night, and he saw that it flew away from Dumbledore a full minute before Snape ever came up the stairs. Voldemort came out of Draco's mind and began, very quietly, to laugh. Nobody in the room understood. Draco was on his knees by then. Narcissa had gone the color of paper. Bellatrix, who had been waiting all night for permission to be violent, looked from her sister to her master and could not read the laugh at all. "Stand up," Voldemort said to Draco. Take out your wand. I want you to picture this properly, because it is the moment the war was decided, and there was no thunder and no fire and no dramatic music. It was a boy in a borrowed dinner jacket, standing in a drawing room he had grown up in, holding out a 10-inch hawthorn wand he had bought at 11 years old, in front of a man who was about to take the last thing he owned. It was not a duel. It lasted 2 seconds. Voldemort did not even use the Elder Wand for it. He borrowed Bellatrix's because he wanted the victory to be clean and unarguable, and he disarmed Draco Malfoy in the middle of his own home, in front of his mother and his father. Draco's wand flew into Voldemort's left hand, and in that instant, in a way that nobody in the room could see or feel or measure, the Elder Wand in his right hand changed its mind. He tested it in the garden an hour later. He turned a stone fountain into a column of white fire that burned without fuel until sunrise. He split an oak tree that had stood there for 400 years, and then he put it back together, and then he split it again. Bellatrix said afterwards that she had never seen him look like that. Not triumphant, satisfied. The way a man looks when a puzzle finally comes apart in his hands. He kept Draco's hawthorn wand. He did not give it back, and he did not let anyone give Draco another one. He wanted the boy who had beaten Dumbledore to be walking proof of what happened to people who had something Voldemort wanted. So Draco Malfoy spent the next 2 years of his life without a wand, in a house full of Death Eaters, being nobody. Hold on to that too. It comes back. Now, 2 things were true in the last week of April 1998, and neither side knew both of them. Harry Potter was carrying an elm wand that had belonged to Narcissa Malfoy, and it had never really warmed to him. It worked. It cast. But every spell came out slightly late, like a translated joke. He did not complain about it, because complaining about a wand felt absurd when Dobby was under the sand at Shell Cottage. But Hermione noticed, and Ron noticed, and Mr. Ollivander, who was recovering in the little room upstairs with the window that faced the sea, noticed most of all. "A wand chooses," Ollivander told him one evening. "It can be taken. It can be won. But taken is not the same as chosen, Mr. Potter. And in a hard moment, you will feel the difference." Harry said he would manage. He had his broken one still, the holly and phoenix feather wand that had snapped in Godric's Hollow at Christmas. He kept the 2 halves in a fold of cloth in the beaded bag Hermione carried everywhere. He could not have told you why. And the second true thing was this. Lord Voldemort now held, fully and truly, and for the first time in his life, a wand that could not be beaten. He did not tell anyone. Not Bellatrix, not Snape. He had learned something about himself that spring, which was that his mistakes came from talking, and so he stopped. 6 days later, 3 teenagers broke into Gringotts Bank. To explain why that mattered, I have to explain what Harry was doing in a bank vault, and for that, I need to say the word that the whole war was actually about. Horcrux. A Horcrux is what you get when a wizard tears a piece of his own soul out and hides it inside an object. While the piece survives, the wizard cannot truly die. His body can be destroyed, but he stays somewhere, waiting. Voldemort made 6 of them, which no wizard in recorded history had ever attempted, and he did it on purpose, and it left him barely human. Almost nobody knew. Dumbledore worked it out slowly over years and told exactly 1 student, and that student told exactly 2 friends. That is the entire population of people on the good side of the war who understood what they were fighting. 3 teenagers and a portrait of a dead headmaster. By the last week of April, 4 of the 6 were gone. A diary, stabbed with a basilisk fang in a chamber under the school. A ring, destroyed by Dumbledore at a terrible cost. A locket, carried through a winter forest and finally broken open by Ron Weasley with the sword of Godric Gryffindor. And on the 1st of May, 1998, a small golden cup with a badger engraved on it, stolen out of the deepest vault in Gringotts by 3 teenagers, a goblin, and a half-blind dragon. That leaves 2. Remember that. 2. The dragon flight out of Gringotts was seen by half of Diagon Alley, and word reached Voldemort within the hour. In the world we know, that news made him lose his mind for a while. He killed everyone in the room. Then, he tore across the country, checking his hiding places like a man patting his pockets for keys, and by the time he steadied himself, he had made several mistakes. He still lost his temper here, but when it burned out, he sat down on the floor of a house in the middle of nowhere and made himself think it through, and the conclusion he came to was the correct one. They know. Somebody has told the boy what I am, and he is taking me apart, piece by piece, and he has done it 4 times without my noticing. And then the second conclusion, which is the one that changed the war. The snake is the piece I cannot hide, because I need her with me. Nagini was not an object in a vault. She was 12 feet of living Horcrux, who followed him from room to room, and everything about her that made her useful also made her the easiest of all of them to reach. So he did something he had never done, which was to give up a comfort in exchange for safety. He put her inside a sphere. Picture a globe of clear, enchanted air, big enough for a snake to coil in, sitting in the space just above his shoulder and moving when he moved. Inside it, Nagini was untouchable. Spells slid off it. Steel would not pass. It hung there like a bubble of dirty starlight, and it did not open, not for anything, not for feeding, not for comfort, not for spectacle. In the world we know he built this same sphere, and then on the night that mattered most he opened it, because he wanted a 15-year-old boy to be frightened, and the snake he let out was killed within the minute. In this world, he never opened it at all. Now we can talk about the 2nd of May. Harry, Ron, and Hermione came back to Hogwarts through a tunnel from a pub in Hogsmeade, because Harry had seen, through the strange broken window in his mind that let him look out of Voldemort's eyes, that one of the last Horcruxes was hidden inside the school. He did not know what it was. He knew only that it was something of Rowena Ravenclaw's, and that it was in a room he had walked past for 6 years. He walked into the room of requirement and found 40 students living in it, and Neville Longbottom with a face like a map of the year he had had. And that was how the Battle of Hogwarts started. Not with an attack, with a boy coming home. By midnight the castle was surrounded, and the shields were up, and the statues had come down off their plinths to fight. Professor McGonagall walked the corridors, giving orders in a voice that never once went up in volume. The teachers evacuated the youngest students through the tunnel. The Order of the Phoenix came through the fireplaces. Charlie Weasley came with half of Hogsmeade behind him, and inside all of that noise, 3 people were doing something nobody else in the castle understood. Ron and Hermione went down into the Chamber of Secrets, which Ron opened by imitating the hissing language he had heard Harry speak years before, which is the single most impressive thing Ron Weasley ever did, and which almost nobody gives him credit for. They came back up carrying basilisk fangs. Hermione drove one through Hufflepuff's cup on the stone floor of a flooded chamber, and it screamed, and it was 5. And Harry found the diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw in a mountain of hidden junk in the room of requirement and lost it again inside a fire. That fire is worth 30 seconds. Vincent Crabbe, cornered and out of his depth, cast a curse called Fiend Fire. It is cursed fire that thinks. It takes the shape of animals, and it hunts, and it does not go out, and it eats anything, including things protected by dark magic, and including the wizard who lit it. Crabbe died in it. Harry and Ron and Hermione flew out of the room on 2 old broomsticks with the fire behind them, and Draco Malfoy came out clinging to the back of Harry's broom, wandless, saved by the person he had spent 6 years hating. They never got the diadem out. They did not need to. Fiend fire destroys Horcruxes as thoroughly as basilisk venom. Somewhere in that burning mountain, a small silver crown melted, and a piece of Lord Voldemort ended. That was 6, which left the snake in the glass bubble. And one other thing, and I'm not going to tell you what the other thing is yet, because in this timeline, nobody found out for 2 years. The first hours of the battle went the way they went. I am not going to pretend I can improve on them, and I am not going to dwell on them either. The shields broke a little after 1 in the morning. Giants came through the gap in the west wall. Acromantulas came out of the forest, because a battle smells like food. Death Eaters came through the shattered gates in a black line. The castle fought back with everything it had, including itself. Suits of armor swung swords they had not swung since they were made. Desks flew. The gargoyles jumped. Fred Weasley died in an explosion in a corridor on the 5th floor, laughing at something Percy had said. Percy had been shouting at a Death Eater about the ministry, and Fred had just told his brother he was joking. Actually joking, at last. And then the wall came in. Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks died in the entrance hall within minutes of each other, and their son was 7 weeks old and asleep at his grandmother's house. Colin Creevey, who was 16 and had been evacuated and had sneaked back in, died in the courtyard with a camera in his pocket, and Voldemort himself did not come. Not yet. He stood at the edge of the forest, with a glass bubble floating at his shoulder, and watched his army work, and he did not spend himself on the first wave, and that patience was new. At 3:30 in the morning, he spoke. You have to understand what that sounded like. His voice came into the castle without a body, the way weather does, and it was inside everyone's head at once, calm and almost gentle. He said that he respected their courage. He said that he did not want to spill magical blood, that every witch and wizard who fell was a loss to a world already thin. He said that his quarrel was with one boy. Give me Harry Potter, the voice said, and none of you will be harmed. You have 1 hour. Then the fighting stopped, and the silence afterwards was much worse than the noise had been. They carried the dead into the great hall and laid them in a row, and the survivors went among them, looking for faces they knew. The Weasleys stood around Fred in a circle that had a gap in it. George did not make a sound the whole time, and would not for 11 days. Harry stood at the back of the hall in the invisibility cloak, watching a family break, and he made a decision. Here is where this story and the one you know split so far apart that they never touch again in the world we know. Severus Snape died in the boathouse in the last hour of the battle, killed by Voldemort over a wand that Voldemort had guessed wrong about. And as he died, Snape gave Harry Potter his memories, and in those memories was the truth about the 2nd of May, and about Dumbledore, and about a boy who had a piece of somebody else's soul living behind his eyes since he was 1 year old. In this world, Voldemort had solved his one problem in April in a drawing room with a 2-second duel. He had no reason to suspect Severus Snape of anything. And so Snape spent the night of the 2nd of May exactly where his master had put him, safe, useful, and entirely unable to say a single word of what he knew. Harry Potter never saw those memories. So when Harry walked out of that castle in the last hour before dawn, under the invisibility cloak, alone, he was not walking out to die. He was going hunting. He had one Horcrux left to find, as far as he knew, and he knew exactly where it was. It was floating in a bubble beside the man who had killed his parents. Harry's whole plan, and I want to be fair to him, he was 17 and had not slept in 3 days, was to get close under the cloak, find some way to crack the sphere and kill the snake. He did not tell Ron. He did not tell Hermione. He told nobody, because he had just watched what losing one Weasley did to that family, and he was not going to be the reason they lost another. He went down through the grounds, past the greenhouses, past the lake, into the trees. And 40 minutes later, he had not managed to get within 30 feet of the sphere, because Nagini was awake and she could smell him. Snakes do not see the way we do. They taste the air. An invisibility cloak hides light, and light was the only thing about Harry Potter that was hidden. She began to move inside the sphere, slow at first, then coiling faster, her head tracking something in the trees that none of the 50 men in that clearing could see. Voldemort watched her for 4 seconds and understood. "He is here," he said. Harry ran. He got perhaps 80 yards. 24 Death Eaters filled the space between the trees with spells cast at nothing, sweeping the ground the way you sweep a room with a torch, and one of them clipped him across the shoulder, and he went down hard into wet leaves, and the cloak slid half off him. They dragged him into the clearing by the arms. He was 17 years old. He had a cut over one eye and a wand in his fist that had never liked him, and he was still trying to get up when Bellatrix Lestrange took the elm wand out of his hand and broke it across her knee. Voldemort came and stood over him, and here is the moment. I have thought about this moment more than any other in this entire timeline, and I want to give it to you exactly. Every Death Eater in that clearing expected 2 words. There was nothing else it could be. The boy was on the ground, disarmed, alone, and the Elder Wand was in Voldemort's hand. Voldemort raised the wand. Then he stopped. He stood there with his arm up and his face changing, and one by one the people around him began to shift and glance at each other, because whatever they had come out to the forest to see, it was not this. "My lord," said Bellatrix. He ignored her. He was doing arithmetic. That is all. He was standing over the thing he had wanted for 17 years, and he was counting. Once, in a cottage in Godric's Hollow, he had pointed a wand at this child, and the curse had come back and destroyed his body. He had spent 13 years as less than a ghost because of it. Once, in a graveyard, he had duelled him, and their wands had locked together, and the dead had come out of the tip of his own wand to speak to him. Once, in the Department of Mysteries, he had possessed him, and something inside the boy had hurt so much that Voldemort had been forced out of his skin like a splinter. 3 times. 3 times he had aimed himself at Harry Potter, and 3 times the world had answered in a language he did not speak. And he had learned something 6 weeks earlier in a drawing room about the price of guessing. He had nearly given the Elder Wand's secret to a wrong assumption. He had caught himself just in time, and a man who has just discovered that he can be wrong does not stop discovering it. "No," said Voldemort. He lowered the wand. The silence in that clearing was extraordinary. Fenrir Greyback actually said, "What?" out loud. 3 times, Voldemort said, and he was not talking to any of them. "This child has failed to die correctly. Twice it cost me a body. I will not make a 4th guess in the dark." He looked down at Harry with something that was not hatred and was much worse. It was interest. "I will know what protects you first. Then I will remove it. Then you will die in front of everyone who ever hoped you would not." He turned to Lucius Malfoy. "Bind him. Do not mark him. If he stops breathing before I permit it, you will envy the snake." They took the invisibility cloak. Voldemort turned it over in his hands and knew at once what it was, because he was a scholar of exactly this kind of object, and he folded it away inside his robes, and it was never seen in daylight again. They took the broken halves of the elm wand and threw them in the leaves. They did not take the small, battered golden ball in Harry's left fist, because it was a snitch, and boys keep snitches, and there was nothing in this world less interesting to Lord Voldemort than a schoolboy's toy. That snitch had been left to Harry in Albus Dumbledore's will. Inside it, sealed by a charm that opens only for someone who is certain they are about to die, was a small black stone that could call the dead back to stand beside you. Harry had not opened it. He had never been certain enough. So on the night that Lord Voldemort took possession of the Elder Wand and the Cloak of Invisibility, two of the three legendary objects that the old story says make a man the master of death, the third one went into a cell in his own dungeon in the pocket of a bound prisoner, and he never knew, and he never asked. Keep that in your head. We are going to be here a long time before it matters. Dawn came at 5:10. The defenders in the castle had spent the hour reinforcing the entrance hall, and Hermione Granger had spent 30 minutes of it looking for Harry, and had found the place where he had left the tunnel, and had gone very quiet. Then the fighting started again, and it was nothing like the first half of the night, because now Voldemort came himself. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to make this sound like a slaughter, and it was not. And the people in that castle deserve better than a sentence. They held the entrance hall for 40 minutes against an army. Professor Sprout dropped venomous tentacula onto the courtyard from the greenhouse roof. Aberforth Dumbledore held the west stair with his brother's temper and none of his brother's manners. Molly and Arthur Weasley fought back to back and did not speak, because there was nothing left to say. But Voldemort walked up the middle of it with the Elder Wand fully awake in his hand, and the Elder Wand is not a metaphor. He did not duel people. He removed architecture. He took the great oak front doors off their hinges and folded them into the wall. He put a hole through the astronomy tower that you could have flown a hippogriff through. The enchanted ceiling of the great hall, which had shown the sky for 1,000 years, cracked from end to end like ice on a pond and stopped showing anything at all. Professor Flitwick died, holding the last shield charm across the doors of the great hall. He was very small and very old, and he held it for 6 minutes after the wizards on either side of him had fallen. And when it broke because he did. At 6 in the morning, Minerva McGonagall stood in the middle of the great hall, between Lord Voldemort and about 200 people, most of them children, and she duelled him. She lasted 19 seconds, which is 19 seconds longer than anybody else managed that morning. He did not kill her. He wanted her alive, and that is worth noticing because it tells you what kind of victory he was building. He disarmed her, and he broke her left arm, and he let her get up. Then he had Harry brought in. They brought him through the shattered doors, bound at the wrists, held upright between two Death Eaters, because he could not quite stand on his own. Alive, awake, looking around the hall for faces. In another version of this story, Voldemort carried Harry Potter's body into that courtyard and let everyone believe he was dead, and it broke them for about 90 seconds, and then Neville Longbottom pulled a sword out of a hat, and everything turned around. This was worse, because the hall saw him breathing. Ginny Weasley shouted his name. Ron went for the Death Eaters holding him, and 3 people had to hold Ron. Hermione did not move at all, which frightened the people near her more than the shouting did. And every single person in that hall understood, in the same second, exactly what it meant that Voldemort had brought Harry Potter in alive rather than dead. It meant he was not afraid of him anymore. Look at him, Voldemort said, and then, unbelievably, he offered terms. This is the part that people forget when they imagine a Dark Lord winning. He did not want a crater, he wanted a country. He had spent his whole life wanting to be the greatest wizard who ever lived. And you cannot be that in a ruin, in front of nobody. So he stood in a hall full of the people who hated him most, with their champion bound at his side, and he made an offer that was almost reasonable, which is what made it unbearable. Lay down your wands. Nobody else dies today. The school stays open. The children go back to their families for the summer and come back in September. Anyone who wants to leave Britain may leave, once, in the next 30 days, and never return. Everyone else lives under the new order. And Harry Potter stays with me. There was no counter-offer. There was no clever trick. There was nothing in that hall capable of stopping him, and everybody in it knew. Minerva McGonagall, holding her broken arm against her chest, standing among the bodies of her colleagues and her students, looked at the 200 living children behind her and made the worst decision anybody in this story ever has to make. She put her wand on the floor. One by one, so did the others. Sprout, Slughorn, Arthur Weasley, with his wife's hand on his back, Hagrid, who cried so hard that the sound of it filled the hall, and nobody told him to stop. Some did not surrender. Kingsley Shacklebolt got about 30 people out through the tunnel to Hogsmeade in the confusion, including George and Ginny Weasley, and Luna Lovegood, and Neville Longbottom, who had to be dragged the whole way with his heels down. And Ron and Hermione went out through that tunnel too. And they went because Hermione made a decision in about 4 seconds that she then had to live with for 2 years. She looked at Harry, bound, across a hall full of Death Eaters, and she knew there was no version of the next 5 minutes where she reached him. And she knew that she and Ron were 2 of exactly 3 people alive who knew that Lord Voldemort had made himself into 6 pieces and that 5 of them were gone. If they died in that hall, that knowledge died too. So she grabbed Ron's arm and she pulled, and Ron Weasley, who had spent an entire winter hating himself for walking away from Harry Potter once already, walked away from Harry Potter again. He was not the same afterwards. We will come back to that. The Battle of Hogwarts ended at 6:25 in the morning on the 2nd of May, 1998, with a surrender. And that is the last time in this story that anything happens quickly. When people imagine a Dark Lord taking over a country, they usually imagine burning towns and skulls on spikes. Voldemort did not do that, and the reason he did not is the most frightening thing about him. He was not interested in horror, he was interested in permanence. He never made himself Minister for Magic, he simply removed the post. The ministry stayed exactly where it was, with most of the same people at most of the same desks, doing most of the same work, and above all of it, there was now a single office that answered to nobody. Corbin Yaxley ran the day-to-day. Dolores Umbridge got her committee back and a bigger budget. The letters still came on time. That was the point. When the post still arrives, people tell themselves things cannot be that bad. He did not live at the ministry either. He took Hogwarts. I think about that choice a lot. He could have had any building in Britain. He chose the school because it was the first place that had ever been his home, and because a man who has decided he is going to last forever wants his seat in the one building that has already lasted 1,000 years. Severus Snape stayed on as headmaster and ran the school. Voldemort kept rooms in the tower and came and went, sometimes for a month, sometimes for a day, and the students learned to tell from the behavior of the ghosts whether he was in the castle. The school reopened on the 1st of September 1998, exactly on schedule, and that was deliberate too. There were changes. Muggle studies was gone, replaced by a subject about wizarding heritage that was mostly a very long argument with itself. There was a new list of approved families. There was a new rule that every student's blood status was recorded on their file in the first week, and a new rule about what could be said in the Great Hall, and a new set of locks on the doors of the dormitories at night. But there were also charms lessons, and Quidditch on Saturdays, and herbology in the greenhouses with Professor Sprout, who had come back because she had worked out in one terrible sleepless week in August that if all the decent teachers refused to return, then the children would be taught by nobody but the Carrows. Minerva McGonagall came back for the same reason. She was not free. She was allowed to teach Transfiguration and to walk in the grounds and to sit at the staff table, and she was not allowed to leave the castle, and there was a charm on her that told the headmaster's office where she was at all times. She knew it. She taught anyway. There is a particular kind of courage that gets no statues, and that is it. Getting up every morning inside the thing that beat you and doing the small work in front of you because children still need to be taught how to turn a beetle into a button. Outside the castle, The country reorganized itself around fear, the way water reorganizes around a stone. The 30-day window for leaving Britain was real, and Voldemort honored it because he wanted the people who hated him most to remove themselves voluntarily, and because it made everything after look like a choice. About 9,000 witches and wizards left in those 30 days. Some went to Ireland, some to France, most further. They took what they could carry. Families split down the middle in those 4 weeks. A grandmother who would not leave the house she was born in. A brother who said it would blow over. Every one of those arguments was somebody's last conversation, and there were thousands of them. On the 31st day, the borders shut, not metaphorically. The international portkey office stopped issuing, the flu network was cut off at the channel, and a set of wards went up along the coastline that took 100 wizards a fortnight to build, and that turned anyone who crossed them the wrong way inside out. The International Confederation of Wizards met in emergency session in Geneva and did what large organizations do when something terrible happens quickly. They condemned it, they passed sanctions, they expelled Britain and froze its assets and made a great many strong statements. They did not invade. They did not invade for 3 reasons, and I want to lay them out because why didn't the rest of the world just stop him is the question everybody asks about a story like this, and it deserves a real answer. First, there were 11,000 hostages in Britain, and about 300 of them were children in a castle. Second, nobody outside Britain believed that the Statute of Secrecy would survive an open magical war on that scale. An invasion meant giants and dragons and curses in Muggle cities, and the entire international wizarding order is built on Muggles not knowing. Voldemort understood that better than the ICW did. He used it as a shield for 2 years. And third, there was the wand. Word got out. It always does. Somewhere in the summer of 1998, a story began moving around the wizarding world that the Dark Lord of Britain had opened Albus Dumbledore's tomb and taken out the Elder Wand, and that it had answered him. You can pass any number of resolutions about a man. Nobody wants to be the one to walk up to him. The Muggle world noticed almost nothing, which is its own kind of horror. There were more accidents than usual in certain parts of England that summer. There were a lot of gas leaks. There was a stretch of the West Country where 900 people came down with something the news called a viral encephalitis outbreak, and afterwards, none of them could remember the last week of June. The Muggle Prime Minister received 1 visitor in September, and after that, he stopped receiving them, and the small portrait in his office that had spoken to him for years went permanently silent. He told nobody. Who would he have told? Gringotts fell in the first week. The goblins had guarded that bank for over 1,000 years, under a treaty that everybody pretended was equal. When 3 teenagers and a dragon came out through the roof of it, Voldemort had the excuse he needed. Wizarding administrators were installed above the goblin managers. Certain vaults were opened. The oldest goblin families were removed from the lower levels. I want you to hold on to that, because a grudge held by goblins is not like a grudge held by anybody else. They keep books, they remember for centuries, they were counting from the first day, and in the spring of 2000 they presented the bill. The people who had surrendered in the Great Hall were not executed. That surprised everyone. They were catalogued. Arthur Weasley lost his job, his wand license, and his house. The borough burned on the 11th of May, and the official record says it was a chimney fire. Arthur and Molly were resettled in 2 rooms in a supervised building in Nottingham, and they were required to sign a register every Friday, and they did that for 4 months while quietly building the most effective safe house network in Britain out of nothing but a knitting circle and a man who knew every clerk in the ministry by their first name. Rubeus Hagrid was arrested on the 2nd of May and held for 8 months because there was nowhere in Britain that could comfortably hold a half-giant, and because Voldemort could not decide whether he was a threat or a mascot. He escaped in January into the mountains, and we will find him again later with company. Horace Slughorn walked out of the castle in June 1998, told everyone he was retiring to Bath, and disappeared instead into a village in Wales under another name. That mattered later more than anyone expected. because Horace Slughorn was the only living wizard other than the three of them who had ever heard Tom Riddle ask a question about Horcruxes, and he had spent 50 years being ashamed of answering it. And on the 1st of May, 1999, a notice went up in every wizarding building in Britain, announcing that the following day would be a public holiday. Victory Day. It would be held at Hogwarts. Attendance for approved families was expected. There would be a procession and speeches and a demonstration. The demonstration was Harry Potter. They brought him into the Great Hall at noon in front of 600 people. He was 3 months short of his 19th birthday. He had not been outside in a year. He was thin, and his hair had grown down over his eyes, and he stood between two guards and looked at the cracked ceiling that had not shown the sky since the morning it broke, and he said nothing at all. Voldemort spoke for 11 minutes. He talked about order and about blood and about the future, and then he had the boy taken away again, and the whole country understood the message perfectly. And the message was this: the one you were waiting for is downstairs, and he is not coming. Now let me take you downstairs. There is a level under the Hogwarts dungeons that most students never hear about. It is older than the dungeons. It is older than the foundations of the towers. It is a set of storerooms cut into the rock when the castle was first built, and by 1998, they had been empty for 600 years. Voldemort had one of them opened, cleaned, and sealed. The room was about the size of a classroom. There was a bed, a table, a chair, a lamp that never went out and never got brighter, and a basin. There was no door. There was a stretch of wall that a guard could turn into a doorway from the outside, and that was all. There was no window, and there was nothing in that room made of glass or wood or metal that could be turned into a weapon. And there was a charm on the walls that Bill Weasley later described when he finally saw the specifications as the single most expensive piece of containment magic ever built in Britain. And the thing that charm was built to stop above everything else was a house elf. Voldemort had learned that lesson personally. He had stood in the wreckage of his own drawing room in March 1998 and been told that Harry Potter had been carried out of a locked cellar by a creature in a pillowcase. House elf magic does not obey wizard wards. It goes where wizard magic cannot. It had beaten him twice in his life, and both times it had cost him the boy. So the walls of that room were cut with a binding that no elf could cross, and no elf could hear through. Harry could have shouted his own elf's name until his voice went, and Creature would never have known. Later, when the Resistance finally understood where he was, that binding was the single reason they could not simply send an elf down and be finished by tea time. Dobby saved Harry Potter's life at Malfoy Manor and paid for it. The lesson Voldemort took from it kept Harry in a cell for 2 years. Both of those things are true at once, and I do not think there is anything useful to say about that. And there was a bell. That is the detail that tells you everything. Voldemort had a silver bell hung in his own rooms, 12 floors up, tied by magic to the heartbeat of the prisoner below. As long as Harry Potter's heart was beating, the bell was silent. If it ever stopped, the bell would ring. He listened for that silence every night for 2 years, and it never came, and it drove him slowly out of his mind. Because he could not solve the boy. He started in the summer of 1998, and he started properly, the way he did everything now. He brought in books. He had the Department of Mysteries send him everything they had on protective sacrifice. He read for weeks. He came down himself, at first every few days. He never hurt him. I want to be clear about that, because it is not mercy, it is arithmetic. Voldemort had spent 17 years learning that hurting Harry Potter produced results he did not predict. And he had made a decision in the forest never to guess again. so he questioned him instead, which in Voldemort's hands means legilimency, which means having a man walk around inside your memories while you stand there. Harry was a bad occlumens. He had been a bad occlumens at 15, and he was a bad one at 18. Voldemort went through his head like a man going through a filing cabinet. He learned the shape of the last year. He learned about a locket in a forest and a sword in a frozen pool. He learned that Ron Weasley had left and come back. He learned about a wedding and a tent and a bang. He did not learn about Horcruxes, and I need to tell you why. Because this is the one lucky thing that happens to the good side in this entire story. Voldemort could not bear to look for it. He knew from the vault and the diary and the locket that they had been hunting the pieces of him. He knew he had lost 5. What he could not do, ever, in 17 years, was hold in his own mind the possibility that somebody understood what he had done to himself. His Horcruxes were the one subject where his brilliance turned into a blind spot, because looking at them straight meant looking at what he had become, and he had built his entire existence out of not doing that. So he went through Harry Potter's memories again and again, and every time he came near that shape, he slid off it, the way your eye slides off a word you do not want to read. But he did find the thing he was looking for. It took him until February 1999. He found it in Harry's memory of a graveyard in Little Hangleton on a June night in 1995. He watched Wormtail cut the boy's arm. He watched his own blood come back. He watched himself step out of the cauldron with a new body, and he watched himself reach out and touch Harry Potter's face on purpose to prove that his mother's protection no longer burned him. And Voldemort, standing inside that memory 4 years later, finally understood what he had actually done. Lily Potter had died, refusing to step aside. That refusal had put a charm on her son that no dark wizard could break, because it was not the kind of magic you break. It lived in her blood, and her blood was in Harry. And on that June night, Voldemort had taken it into his own body and made it part of himself. He had spent 4 years thinking he had stolen her protection. He had adopted it. While Voldemort lived with Harry's blood in his veins, Lily Potter's charm was alive inside the man it had been made against. And while it was alive, it went on doing the one thing it had ever been made to do, which was to keep her son from being killed by Lord Voldemort. He came back up out of that memory and did not speak for a day and a half. Now here is where most people expect the obvious move. If Voldemort cannot kill Harry himself, he simply tells Bellatrix Lestrange to do it. She would have done it with her teeth. He thought of it. Of course he thought of it, inside about 4 seconds. And then he thought further, and this is where the smartest thing he ever did and the most stupid thing he ever did turn out to be the same thing. He asked himself what the charm actually was now. It was not in the boy, it was in him. It was a living piece of protective magic that had made its home inside Lord Voldemort's body and had been sitting there for 4 years, and he had never once wondered what it was doing to him. He had spent his whole life collecting reasons why he could not die. And here was one more, and it was tied by a thread to a heartbeat downstairs, and he did not know what would happen to it if the heartbeat stopped. Maybe nothing. Maybe the charm would simply stay, inert, harmless. Maybe. Lord Voldemort had never once in his life gambled with the question of his own survival. So, he made a law. Harry Potter was to be kept fed, kept whole, kept breathing, and any wizard who harmed him would be dealt with personally. Bellatrix Lestrange, who had waited 17 years, was told to her face that the boy was not hers, and never would be. And that is how Harry Potter became the single safest person in the whole of magical Britain. I want you to sit with the irony for a moment, because it is the engine of the next 2 years. There was one piece of Voldemort's soul left in the world besides the snake. It was behind Harry's eyes. It had been there since he was 1 year old, and while it existed, Voldemort could not truly die. And the only person in the universe who could destroy that piece without destroying Harry along with it was Voldemort himself, because the blood in his veins was the only thing anchoring Harry to life through a killing curse. The one man who could end the war had just made a solemn law forbidding it. He was protecting himself. He was right to. He was also, without ever knowing it, doing the single most helpful thing he could possibly have done for the people trying to destroy him, because a Horcrux you keep alive in a locked room is a Horcrux that can be found. 3 people alive knew any part of this. 2 of them were downstairs and upstairs in the same castle. The third had a portrait on his wall. Severus Snape had been told the truth in the winter of 1997 in an office at the top of a spiral staircase by an old man with a blackened hand. He had been told what the piece in Harry Potter meant and what would have to happen for the war to be won. And he had hated Albus Dumbledore more in that hour than he had ever hated anyone. His entire plan, everything he had spent 17 years building, had been aimed at one single moment. At the right time, he would tell the boy would go to Voldemort. Voldemort would kill him, and the piece would die, and after that, Lord Voldemort would be an ordinary mortal man who could be finished by anybody with a wand and a clear shot. And instead, the war had ended in 6 hours without him. And now the boy was in a cell under his own school, and the Dark Lord had passed a law against the only thing that could save the world. Snape went up to the headmaster's office on the night of the 3rd of May, 1998, and shut the door and stood in front of the portrait of Albus Dumbledore and said something that was not fit to be repeated. The portrait let him finish. "Yes," said Dumbledore's portrait. "I know." "You know," said Snape. "You are a picture, Dumbledore. You know what the man who sat for you knew, and he did not know this, because this did not happen to him." "Then tell me," said the portrait. So he did. He stood there and told a painting everything, and the painted face got older as he spoke, which portraits are not supposed to be able to do. "The knowledge cannot stay in this room," Dumbledore said at last. "You must get it out of the castle." "To whom?" "To the Granger girl. To anyone she trusts. Severus, it does not matter who carries it, so long as somebody outside these walls knows what is in that cell." And Severus Snape said the thing that decides the next 2 years of British history. Not yet. He had reasons. They were good ones. He was the headmaster of a school with 300 children in it, and he was the only thing standing between those children and the Carrows. He was the most trusted servant of a man who read minds for entertainment. Any message he sent could be traced. Any message that failed would cost him his position, his life, and every child he was quietly protecting. Wait for the right moment, he told himself. Wait until it is safe. He waited 22 months. I am not going to tell you he was wrong. I have thought about it for a long time, and I honestly do not know. But I will tell you what it cost, and you can decide. Down in the room without a door, Harry Potter learned to count. That is what you do. He counted the meals, which came twice a day, and worked out roughly where the mornings were. He counted the guards' footsteps in the passage, and learned that there were 4 of them on rotation, and that one of them had a limp. He counted the stones in the ceiling. There were 411. He kept his mind by telling himself things out loud. He went through the Gryffindor team lineups back to his first year. He named every teacher he had ever had. He described the burrow, room by room, out loud in the dark, because it was the first place that had ever felt like a house instead of a building. And every single night, before he slept, he said 3 names out loud into an empty room, because he had decided very early that the day he stopped saying them would be the day this place had actually got him. Ron, Hermione, Ginny. He said it for 640 nights. On the 641st, somebody heard him. To tell you who heard him, I have to take you out of that castle and back about 18 months to a cottage on a beach in Cornwall with too many people in it. Shell Cottage in the summer of 1998 held Bill and Fleur Weasley, Ron, Hermione, Ginny, George, Luna Lovegood, Neville Longbottom, and an elderly wand-maker with a cough. 9 people, 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a hole in the middle of everything shaped like a person who was not there. Ron Weasley was in the worst shape of his life. Everybody understood why, and nobody said it, which made it worse. He had walked out of the Great Hall. He had turned around and left Harry Potter bound between 2 Death Eaters, and he had gone down a tunnel to save himself. And it did not matter how many times Hermione explained the reasoning, because Ron did not have an argument with the reasoning. He had an argument with the memory. He stopped eating properly. He sat on the sea wall at 4 in the morning for weeks. And then, sometime in July, he stopped doing that too and started doing something else. And it is the reason there is a happy ending in this story at all. He started planning. Not big plans. He got a piece of parchment and he started writing down everything he knew about Hogwarts. Every corridor, every secret passage from the Marauder's map, which had been left behind in the castle but which lived complete in his head. Where the kitchens were, where the pipes ran, which staircases moved and on what schedule, which portraits gossip and which ones could be trusted. By September, that parchment had become 40 parchments. By Christmas, it was a book. Ron Weasley spent 19 months building, out of memory and stubbornness, the most detailed map of Hogwarts that had ever existed outside the castle, and when it finally mattered, it was the difference between a rescue and a massacre. Everybody found their job that summer, because you either find one or you fall apart. Hermione took the knowledge. She had the only complete account of the Horcruxes in the world outside a locked room, and she wrote it out in a code of her own invention and kept it inside a book of ancient runes, and she was terrified every day that she would be killed, and it would go with her. So she went looking for the one other person alive who might understand. It took her 4 months to find Horace Slughorn, and when she did, he tried to close the door. "I am retired," he said. "I am in Wales. I am nobody's teacher." "Professor," said Hermione. "He made 6. Slughorn sat down on his own doorstep. What he gave her, over 3 days in a cottage in a wet valley, was the arithmetic. 50 years earlier, a 16-year-old boy had asked him a question about splitting a soul, and the number in that question had been 7. 7 pieces. 6 of them hidden, 1 left walking around in the body. Hermione counted on the table in front of him. Diary, ring, locket, cup, diadem, snake, 6. 5 of them destroyed, and 1 of them 12 feet long and floating in a glass bubble beside the most dangerous wizard alive. "That is all of them," she said. "That is the whole list." And it was. It was a complete, correct, perfectly reasoned list of every Horcrux that Tom Riddle ever meant to make. I want you to notice how good that work was. She was 19 years old, working from a 50-year-old memory and her own notes, and she got every deliberate thing he had done exactly right. The thing that beat her was the thing he had done by accident. For the next year and a half, every plan the Resistance made was built on the belief that there was one Horcrux left in the world. And they were wrong, and they had absolutely no way of knowing they were wrong, and if they had won any of their early fights, they would have destroyed the snake, killed Voldemort's body, and then spent the rest of their lives wondering why he kept coming back. Neville Longbottom became the face. Nobody voted. It just happened, the way it does. He was the one who had held the Room of Requirement for a year while Harry was away. He was the one who stood up in the Great Hall, and when the regime started printing notices, his was the face on them, and there is nothing like a wanted poster for making somebody famous. He hated it. He was terrible at speeches. He was very good at the actual work, which was walking into a village where a family had just been registered and getting them out of the country in under 6 hours, and he did that 31 times. His grandmother had to be moved 4 times in a year, and she complained bitterly about the standard of the safe houses, and she never once suggested he stop. Ginny Weasley was 17 in the summer of 1999, and she was the best duelist in the entire Resistance, which nobody enjoyed pointing out in front of her mother. She ran the retrieval teams. If somebody had to be got out of a house that was already being watched, Ginny went. She had a rule that she would not take anyone under 15 on an operation, and she broke it exactly once, and the boy she broke it for is alive today. George Weasley ran Potter Watch. That is the part I find hardest to talk about, honestly. Potter Watch was a pirate radio program that moved every night and told people the truth. It had existed before the fall, and Fred had been on it, and Fred had been the funny one. For 4 months after the battle, George did not speak on the air at all. He built the equipment, he fixed the aerials, he sat in the room while other people talked. And then, one night in September 1998, the man who was meant to be presenting did not arrive because he had been arrested that afternoon, and George Weasley leaned into a microphone in a barn in Yorkshire and started talking. He was not funny for a long time. He read out names, mostly. Names of the dead, names of the missing, names of families who needed somewhere to go, and if you had a wireless and you knew the password, you sat in the dark and listened to a man read a list. The first time he made a joke on air was the 9th of March 1999, and it was a joke about the Minister for Magic's hat, and it was not very good, and people all over Britain cried in their kitchens. That is what a resistance actually is, most of the time. It is not battles. It is somebody reading a list, and a knitting circle in Nottingham that is not a knitting circle, and a man in Romania feeding people across a mountain border under cover of a dragon reserve. That was Charlie. 206 people got out of Britain through Romania between 1998 and 2000, and every one of them traveled in a crate that was officially full of livestock. Luna Lovegood did the thing nobody else could do, which was talk to what was left in the forest. The centaurs had fought at Hogwarts and then withdrawn into the deep trees and refused every human who came near. Luna went in alone in November with no wand raised and stayed 3 weeks and came out with an agreement, not an alliance. Centaurs do not do alliances. An agreement that when the sky said so, they would not stand aside a second time. She also came back with a way of moving people that nobody had thought of, which was thestrals. You cannot track a thestral. Most wizards cannot even see one. For 19 months, the Resistance moved its most urgent messages on the backs of invisible horses, guided by a girl who could see them because she had watched her mother die at 9 years old. Kingsley Shacklebolt left Britain deliberately in the last week of the 30-day window and spent 2 years in Geneva being extremely annoying. He could not make the International Confederation invade. He could make them fun things. By the end of 1999, there was money, there were forged papers, there were safe houses in 6 countries, and there was a standing agreement that if Britain's border wards ever came down, 11 governments would move at once. Boring, bureaucratic, unglamorous work that turned out to matter enormously. Molly and Arthur Weasley ran the network inside the country and did not once discuss the thing they were both thinking about, which was Percy. Because Percy Weasley had gone back to the ministry. He had fought at the battle. He had been in that corridor when the wall came in, and 6 weeks later, his name appeared on a departmental list back at his desk in the administration of the man who had killed his brother. The family did not understand it. Molly stopped saying his name. Bill said once, "There will be a reason." And Ron said something back that I am not going to repeat. And they did not speak for 2 days. There was a reason. It was the right one. Nobody found out until it was far too late to tell him so, and Mr. Ollivander sat in the small upstairs room at Shell Cottage, and answered the question that Hermione asked him about 40 times in 18 months, which was how you beat a wand that cannot be beaten. His answer never changed. You do not beat the wand, Miss Granger. You beat the man. Wand allegiance does not care about power. It cares about defeat. The elder wand had passed from Dumbledore to a frightened boy on a tower because that boy had disarmed him. It had passed from that boy to Voldemort in a drawing room for the same reason. So if somebody disarms him, said Hermione, then it is theirs, said Ollivander, and it will not fight for him afterwards. It will not even try. How do you disarm the most powerful wizard alive? And the old man said the thing that Ron wrote down and pinned above his desk and looked at every day for a year and a half. You do not have to be stronger than him. You have to be faster than him once. They tried, of course. Not that. Other things. There were 14 operations against the regime in 18 months. 8 worked. 4 were partial. 2 were disasters. They freed 40 prisoners from a holding facility in Bristol. They destroyed the registration records for the whole of Scotland twice because the regime rebuilt them. They got Hagrid out of the mountains in the spring of 1999. Or rather, he got himself out and then came and found them. And he brought his half-brother Grop, who is 16 feet tall and who spent the next year living in a quarry in Wales, being fed by Charlie Weasley's dragon handlers. They never got near the snake. Not once. In 18 months of trying, the closest anybody came to Nagini was 200 yards, and the man who managed that did not come back. And on the 2nd of May, 1999, they all sat in a barn in Yorkshire around a wireless, listening to a broadcast that the regime put out on every frequency in Britain so that nobody could miss it, and they heard a voice describe a boy being led into the Great Hall. Ron Weasley put his head in his hands. Then he lifted it and said, "Right, he is alive. That changes everything." And he pulled out the map. They went in on the 19th of December, 1999. The plan was Ron's, and it was good. There was a passage that ran from the cellar of the Hogshead Inn in Hogsmeade all the way up into the Room of Requirement, and it had carried 40 students to safety 2 years earlier. Aberforth Dumbledore had opened it, and Aberforth Dumbledore was still standing behind his own bar, older than anyone else in Hogsmeade and twice as difficult, serving bad drink to Death Eaters and saying nothing. The team was 6: Ron, Ginny, Neville, Bill Weasley, Lee Jordan, and a former Auror called Marlowe who had lost his license and gained a purpose. They got in. That is the thing people forget when they tell this story as a failure. They got into Hogwarts. The passage still ran, though the Room of Requirement at the far end was a burned hollow shell that smelled of ash 2 years on. They came out into a corridor on the 7th floor at 2:30 in the morning, 6 people in a castle holding 400, and they went down. They made it as far as the dungeons, and then they hit the thing that no map could have told them, because Ron's map was built out of a schoolboy's memory of a school, and this was not on it. There is no staircase down to the old storerooms. There never was. The level under the dungeons had been sealed since the 15th century, and the only way in was a stretch of blank wall that a guard opened from the outside with a spoken key. And the guard rotation had been changed 9 days earlier. They stood in a cold stone corridor 40 feet above Harry Potter and had absolutely no idea he was underneath them. Ginny found a storeroom that was guarded and blew the door off it, and it was full of school brooms. That was when the alarm went. I have gone back and forth on how much of the next hour to give you. It was very fast and very bad. They lost Marlowe on the 3rd floor. Lee Jordan took a curse across the back that he still cannot sit straight from. Bill got them out with a piece of curse breaking that he says was mostly luck. Back up to the 7th floor, into the burned room, into the passage, and the passage came out in a cellar in Hogsmeade with about 30 Death Eaters in the street above it. Aberforth Dumbledore was standing at the top of the cellar stairs with a shotgun in one hand, which is a muggle weapon and which he had owned for 40 years and never fired, and his wand in the other. He told them to run. Then he shut the door. He held that in for 11 minutes. Aberforth Dumbledore spent his whole life being the other one, the disappointing brother, the goat man, the one who broke Albus's nose at their sister's funeral and was right to. And at the end of it, he stood in the doorway of a filthy pub and held off 30 of the worst wizards in Britain for 11 minutes so that 6 people could get to the tree line. And there is no memorial to him anywhere, and I think he would have been genuinely furious if there were. The Hog's Head burned that night. The painting of a young girl that hung above the mantelpiece burned with it, and the passage it guarded closed forever, and that was the last easy way into Hogwarts gone. The regime's response was not what anybody expected. There were no public executions. Voldemort had learned that martyrs are expensive. Instead, there were 360 arrests over 9 days, quietly, at breakfast time, and the safe house network in the Midlands stopped existing, and 14 people the resistance depended on were simply gone. Augusta Longbottom was taken on the 23rd of December from a cottage near Ottery St. Catchpole. She was 87 years old. She told the men who came for her to wait while she found her hat. They held her at the ministry, and they let it be known that they were holding her, which is the point. Neville Longbottom spent the next 4 months knowing that his grandmother was in a cell because of him, and he did not stop working for a single day. And if you want to know what that costs a person, he was 19 years old, and his hair had grey in it by the spring. That was the winter. It was the lowest the resistance ever got. By the end of January 2000, they were down to about 60 active people, no way into the castle, no way near the snake, and an enemy who had just proved he could take 400 of them off the board in a fortnight without raising his voice. And underneath all of it, in a room with 411 stones in the ceiling, Harry Potter had spent 2 years doing the only thing available to him, which was thinking. Here is what he had to work with. He knew he could speak to snakes, and that no Potter ever had. He knew that when Voldemort was angry, his scar hurt, and that when Voldemort was happy, he sometimes woke up laughing in somebody else's voice. He knew he had once seen through the eyes of a snake in a corridor in London. He knew Dumbledore had spent a year showing him memories of Tom Riddle, collecting objects and hiding pieces of himself inside them. And he knew one more thing, which he had never told anybody, because it had always sounded insane. He knew that at Godric's Hollow, on the night his parents died, something had gone into him. He had felt it in the Department of Mysteries when Voldemort possessed him. Not an attack, a recognition. Something in him had answered. For 2 years, he turned it over. And sometime in the middle of January 2000, alone, with no books and no teacher and nobody to check his working, Harry Potter worked out what he was. There were 7 pieces, 6 hidden and 1 in the body. Voldemort had made 6 on purpose, and Harry could name 5 that were gone, and 1 that hissed inside a glass ball. And the night the curse rebounded in that cottage, the piece of soul that was ripped loose had gone into the only living thing left in the room. He was the last one. I have thought a lot about what that must have been like. Not the horror, the relief. Because for 2 years, he had been lying in a locked room being useless while other people died. And in one evening, he went from being the war's hostage to being the war's last remaining problem. And a problem has a solution. The solution was that Lord Voldemort had to kill him, not somebody else, him. Harry did not know about the blood in the graveyard, so he assumed he would simply die, and he made his peace with that in about 4 days, which tells you most of what you need to know about Harry Potter. The trouble was that he could not make it happen. He tried for a fortnight. When Voldemort came down, Harry insulted him. He mocked the wand. He mocked the tomb it came out of. He said Dumbledore's name until the word had no shape left in it. And Voldemort looked at him with that terrible patience, and did not raise his wand once. "You want it?" he said on the last visit. "That is new. That is very interesting, and I do not do interesting things until I understand them." And he left. And Harry sat down on the floor and understood that he was going to be alive in that room in 10 years. That was the night of the 1st of February, 2000. 641 nights since the surrender. He lay down. He did what he did every night and said 3 names into the dark. But he said them differently this time because he had spent the day deciding that the boy who walked into that castle was not coming out of it, and that the least he could do was say goodbye properly. "Ron," he said. "Hermione. Ginny." 400 miles away, in a farmhouse kitchen in Aberdeenshire, a small silver object on the table by Ron Weasley's elbow clicked itself open. Albus Dumbledore had left 3 things in his will: a book to Hermione, a snitch to Harry, and to Ron Weasley a deluminator which looks like a cigarette lighter and which takes the light out of a room and gives it back. It does one other thing, and Dumbledore had built it in on purpose, and it had happened exactly once before. It answers when somebody who loves Ron Weasley says his name and means it. Ron had carried it for 2 years. Harry had said his name 640 times into a sealed room under a mountain of stone, and not one of those nights had it stirred, because Harry had been saying it as a discipline, the way you say a password. He had been saying it to stay sane. On the 641st night, he said it to say goodbye, and the enchantment does not listen to sound. Ron was alone. Hermione had gone to bed an hour before. The deluminator opened, and every light in the kitchen went out, and a small ball of blue light came out of it and hung in the air, and Ron Weasley stopped breathing. "Harry," he said. The light went into his chest. He did not think. There was nothing to think about. He turned on the spot and vanished, the way he had once before, and the light took him as close as magic in this world can take anybody. He arrived on frozen ground in the dark, and he was standing outside a pair of iron gates with winged boars on the pillars. You cannot apparate into Hogwarts. You never could. The enchantments on that castle are 800 years old, and they are the reason there was a war for it at all. So the light had brought Ron Weasley to the exact nearest point in the entire world to Harry Potter, and then it had stopped, and it was still pulling, hard, downward and to the left, towards a place under the earth about half a mile away. He stood there for perhaps 9 seconds. Then 2 things happened. A dog barked somewhere up by the castle, and Ron Weasley remembered that he was the only person alive holding the map. He turned on the spot again and was gone before the patrol reached the gates. He was sick twice when he got back. Then he woke the entire house, and he stood in that kitchen at 2 in the morning with his hands shaking so badly he could not hold a quill, and he told Hermione to write. "Under the dungeons," he said. "Not in them. Under. There is a level below the storerooms, and he is in it, and the light was pulling straight down through the rock, and I can put it on the map to within 20 feet. Ginny said, "How do you know it was him?" And Ron said, "Because it only opens for people who love me, and there are 5 of them, and 4 of them are in this room." Nobody said anything for a while after that. Then Hermione Granger, who had not slept properly in 21 months, sat down at the table and said, "Then we have 3 problems." "Snake," said Ron. "Wand," said Ginny. "And getting 200 feet under a castle full of Death Eaters," said Neville. They had 3 months. They did not know that yet. The message came through Gringotts, which nobody expected. The goblins had been keeping accounts for 2 years. Wizard administrators sitting in the offices of goblin managers. Vaults opened that had been sealed by treaty. 900 years of agreement torn up in a fortnight because 3 children stole a cup. So when a pale, expensively dressed witch came into the bank in the second week of February 2000 and asked to speak to a goblin named Bogrod about a family matter, the conversation that actually happened had nothing to do with money, and by that evening, a folded note was in a farmhouse in Aberdeenshire. Narcissa Malfoy wanted out. Her price was simple, and she did not pretend otherwise. Her son and herself out of Britain permanently, with whatever they could carry. Not her husband. She had been very precise about that, and nobody ever asked her why. Hermione was against it. Ron was violently against it. Ginny pointed out that the woman had spent 2 years watching her son be nobody in his own house, and that people will do surprising things for that. Neville was the one who said yes. She stood in front of him. He said, "That is all she has ever done. She will do it again if we give her a reason." They gave her a reason, and Narcissa Malfoy gave them, in 3 meetings across 5 weeks, the single most valuable piece of information anybody produced in the whole war. They had been planning to go down 200 feet of solid rock, a wall that opens only from outside, a spoken key that changes weekly, and a castle full of Death Eaters overhead. Ron had 6 versions of the plan, and the best of them killed everyone. "You are being extremely stupid," said Narcissa at the second meeting, in the back room of a shop in Kirkcaldy. "You do not have to go down." She let that sit. "On the 2nd of May, she said, "they bring him up." I remember exactly how that felt when I first put this timeline together, and I want you to have the same second I had. 2 years of impossible, 1 sentence, and it becomes merely very hard. One day a year, for about 40 minutes, Harry Potter was taken out of the safest room in Britain and stood in the middle of the Great Hall in front of 600 people, most of whom had been invited by letter. You do not need to break into a dungeon. You need an invitation. And now I have to tell you about the 3rd of March, 2000, and about a silver doe. Severus Snape had said, "Not yet," for 22 months. What ended it was a report on his own desk, filed by a night patrol, describing a young man with red hair standing outside the main gates at 2 in the morning on the 2nd of February, staring at the ground, who had vanished before he could be reached. Snape read that report 4 times. He knew what it meant. They had found him, and he knew with absolute certainty what they would do about it, because he knew exactly what kind of people they were. They were going to rescue him, and if they rescued him, the last piece of Lord Voldemort's soul would walk out of that castle in a boy's chest and be smuggled to Romania in a crate and live in a safe house in Geneva for 50 years, and Lord Voldemort would be immortal for as long as Harry Potter drew breath. They were going to win the fight and lose the war, and they would never know why. That night, in a farmhouse kitchen in Aberdeenshire, a silver doe walked through the wall. Hermione was on her feet with her wand up. Ron knocked a chair over, and the doe stood in the middle of the kitchen, made of light, absolutely calm. And Hermione lowered her wand very slowly, because Harry had told them about a silver doe in a frozen forest 3 winters before, and she had never forgotten a word of it. The doe spoke with a man's voice. It said a place and a time. And then it said, "Come armed. It will not help you." They met him in the burned shell of the Hog's Head on the 9th of March at 3 in the morning, in the rain. There were 4 of them, Ron, Hermione, Ginny, and Neville, because Neville had insisted, and because nobody argued with Neville anymore. Snape came alone, and he brought a flask and a shallow stone basin, and he set them down on a scorched table and did not sit. "You have 30 minutes, he said, "and then I have to be back, and if I am not back, this ends tonight for all of us." Ron said something. "I am not going to repeat it." Snape let him finish. "Yes," said Snape. Everything you have just said about me is true. Now be quiet, Weasley, and look into the basin, because in about 4 minutes you are going to owe me an apology, and I do not want to be here when you deliver it." They looked. They saw a boy from a poor house in a northern town, and a girl with dark red hair, and a friendship that broke. They saw a young man on a cold hillside begging Albus Dumbledore to protect a woman who had married somebody else. They saw 17 years of a man carrying a doe in his chest. And then they saw the office at the top of the spiral staircase in the winter of 1997, and an old man with a dead black hand explaining, in a perfectly ordinary voice, that on the night Lily Potter died, a piece of Lord Voldemort's soul had broken off and attached itself to the only living thing left in that room, and that it was still there, and that while it lived, the Dark Lord could not die, and that at the correct moment the boy would have to walk out and let Voldemort kill him. Hermione Granger came up out of that basin and sat down on the floor of a burned pub and did not speak for 4 minutes. There is no good way to put the next part into words, so I will just give it to you plain. She had been the one holding the list. She had counted 6 and got 6. Every single plan for 22 months had been built on a number that was 1 short. "It is my fault," she said. "It is not," said Snape, and he sounded almost human. "There was one person alive who could have told you, and he chose not to for 2 years. You are looking at him." Neville asked the practical question, because that is what Neville had become. "So we killed the snake, and then he has to kill Harry." "He will not," said Snape. "He has spent 2 years refusing. He believes the boy's life is holding a protection inside his own body. He's more frightened of that curse than of anything in the world. Then what makes him cast it?" And Severus Snape told them the answer, which he had worked out alone over 22 months, standing at the window of an office he did not want. "Terror," he said. "He is not a brave man. He has never been a brave man. He has arranged his entire existence so that he never has to be. Kill the snake in front of him, and for the first time since he was 16 years old, there will be nothing between Lord Voldemort and dying, and he will know it in his body before he knows it in his head." And then, said Snape, "he will look for the one thing in the room that has ever frightened him, and he will do the thing he has been refusing to do, because a frightened man does not do arithmetic." Ginny said, "And if you are wrong, then Potter is standing in the middle of the Great Hall with no wand, and you have started a battle you cannot win, and everybody in this room dies." He picked up the flask. "I did not say it was a good plan. I said it is the only one. There was one more thing, and he saved it, and I think he saved it deliberately because he wanted to walk out on a better line. The sorting hat is not destroyed," he said. "He burned it in front of 600 people last May. It was theater. Minerva McGonagall put both her hands into that fire and took it out again, and she has kept it in a trunk in her rooms for 11 months, and she will need 3 seconds of warning and no more." Neville said, "Why would the hat matter?" Snape looked at him with an expression that Ron later described as the only time he ever saw the man enjoy anything. "Because in the whole of recorded history," he said, "the sword of Godric Gryffindor has come out of that hat exactly twice, and both times it came to a Gryffindor who needed it. The goblins have the sword now in a vault, and they cannot make it stay. It goes where it likes." He put the flask in his pocket. "Do not be in the middle of the hall, Longbottom. Be near her." Then he walked out into the rain, and none of them ever thanked him, and there was never a chance to. 6 weeks left. They spent them building the most complicated operation the Resistance ever attempted, and it had 4 moving parts, and I will lay them out now so that you can watch them go wrong later. 1. Get 8 people into the Great Hall on the 2nd of May as guests using Polyjuice Potion and 4 sets of approved family invitations that Narcissa Malfoy stole out of her own husband's study. 2. Bring the border wards down at the exact moment the fighting starts, so that 11 foreign governments, who had been sitting on their hands for 2 years, could finally come through. Bill Weasley worked out that the coastal wards were anchored on 11 standing stones. And the goblins knew where 9 of them were, because they had been paid to move 2 of them in 1631. And Charlie's dragon handlers found the last 2. 3. Bring everything that was left of the resistance to the edge of the grounds and hold the gates open. Hagrid. Grob. 240 people. The centaurs, if Luna was right about them, and she usually was. 4. Kill the snake. Nobody had a plan for 4. They had a hat, in a trunk, and a hope. And in the middle of April, the plan very nearly died, because the last piece of information they needed was where in the Great Hall Voldemort would actually be standing, and how many guards, and at what time. And that came from a source inside the Ministry that Hermione had been receiving from for 19 months and had never identified. She called the source the Clerk. The Clerk had given them the Bristol facility, the registration rebill, the guard rotation change that saved 4 lives in October. The Clerk had never asked for anything and had never once slipped. On the 18th of April 2000, the Clerk stopped. Nothing came for 12 days. On the 29th of April, a parcel arrived at a drop in Nottingham, carried by an owl that had flown a very long way and been through something on the way. Inside it was a complete floor plan of the Great Hall for the 2nd of May, with the positions of 41 guards, the timings to the minute, and the exact spot on the dais where Lord Voldemort would stand, and a single sheet of paper, which was not a report. Molly Weasley read 4 words of it and had to sit down, because she had been reading that handwriting on school letters since 1983. Percy Weasley had gone back to the Ministry 6 weeks after his brother died, and had sat at a desk in the administration of the man who killed him, and had been called a traitor by his own family for 2 years, and had never once written to explain, because a letter can be found, and a family that hates you convincingly is the best cover a spy has ever had. He had been arrested on the 17th of April. He had been questioned for 10 days. He did not give them one name. The letter was short. He apologized, which was so exactly the wrong thing to do that it broke everybody who read it. He said he had thought a great deal about the corridor on the 5th floor, and about what Fred had said just before, and that he had been trying ever since to be worth it. He signed it with his full name, the way he signed everything. They buried nothing, because there was nothing to bury. George read the letter out on Potter Watch on the 30th of April, all of it, in a completely level voice. And then he said, "That is my brother," and the broadcast ended. 2 days later, it was the 2nd of May. The 2nd of May, 2000, was a bright, cold morning with a hard blue sky over the lake. 612 people came up the drive to Hogwarts between 9 and 11 o'clock. Approved families in their best robes. Ministry departments in blocks. 300 students in uniform seated along the side of the hall by year because attendance was not optional. 8 of those 612 had drunk Polyjuice Potion at 9:15 in a wood 2 miles away. Ron Weasley walked into that castle wearing the face of a 40-year-old man from a family in Kent who was, at that moment, tied up and unharmed in his own conservatory with 3 of Ginny's people watching him. Hermione came in beside him as his wife. Ginny and Neville came as a brother and sister from Northumberland. George, Luna, Bill and Molly Weasley came in as a family of 4 from Yorkshire, whose real counterparts were similarly furious and similarly comfortable. They were searched at the doors. The search was for weapons and for wands that did not match the register, and every wand they carried was a real one taken from a real approved family that morning. They sat down. At 11:20, out at the edge of the grounds, 240 people were lying flat in bracken above the gates, with a half-giant and a 16-foot giant behind a rise, and a great many things in the trees that were not human and were not entirely on anybody's side. At the same moment, 11 teams were standing at 11 standing stones around the coast of Britain, with Bill Weasley's instructions in their hands, waiting for noon. At 11:30, the doors of the Great Hall closed. I want to describe the room because it was the same room. The tables were gone. The ceiling was still cracked from end to end and still showed nothing. There was a raised platform where the staff table used to be, and Lord Voldemort was standing on it, and a glass sphere with a snake coiled inside it turned slowly in the air beside his shoulder. Severus Snape stood 2 paces behind him on the left, where he had stood for 2 years, and Minerva McGonagall sat at the end of the front row of staff, 65 years old, with a trunk in her rooms 12 floors up, and a piece of parchment in her sleeve that said, in Ron Weasley's handwriting, 3 seconds. At 11:40, they brought Harry Potter in. The hall stood up, because they had been told to. Harry walked between 2 guards with his wrists bound in front of him, and he was 19 years old, and he had not been outdoors in 2 years, except for 40 minutes on this day last year. He looked along the front row of the students and saw about 9 faces he knew. He looked at the cracked ceiling. He looked at Voldemort. And then, from somewhere in the middle of 600 seated people, he felt something that he had no name for and did not question. And his eyes went to a man in his 40s from a family in Kent. And the man's ears had gone red. Polyjuice Potion lasts about an hour. They had taken it at 9:15 because the security queue at the gates was expected to take 40 minutes. It took 90. Ron Weasley began to change back at 11:43 in the 4th row, in a hall containing 41 guards and Lord Voldemort. Everything after this happened in about 9 minutes. Hermione saw it first and did the only thing available, which was to stand up and make herself the emergency. She was on her feet with her wand out before Ron's face had finished, and the first curse of the battle for Hogwarts went past Voldemort's head and hit the wall behind him, and 600 people started screaming at once. The plan was gone. The wards were not down. Neville was 9 rows away from McGonagall, and Lord Voldemort, who had spent 2 years being careful, was extremely fast. He had Harry by the arm before the second spell was cast. He had the guards moving before the third. He put up a shield across the whole front of the platform that turned 4 curses into steam, and he was not frightened. He was annoyed. And that is the most dangerous thing he could possibly have been. "Stop," he said. And the enchantment on that room carried his voice over 600 screaming people, and about half of them did stop, and that half nearly ended it right there. He looked down at the 4 rows of chaos with Harry Potter held at arm's length beside him, and he understood the entire operation in one glance. "You came for him," he said. He sounded almost disappointed. 2 years, and this is the plan. Walk in through the front door and carry him out. He turned to Harry. "Say goodbye to them," he said. "You will not see daylight again." And Harry Potter, who had one thing left and had been saving it since January, turned his head and spoke to the snake. He spoke in Parseltongue. You have to understand what that sounded like in that hall. 600 people froze. It is not a language you hear. It is a wet, rasping, sliding sound. And there was exactly one person alive who was supposed to be able to make it, and he was standing on the platform, and it was coming out of the boy beside him. Harry did not say anything clever. He said, "I know what you are. I know what he put in you. You did not ask for it either." And Nagini, 12 feet of Horcrux inside a sealed globe of enchanted air, turned her head away from her master and looked at Harry Potter, and her tongue came out. She answered him. Everything in this entire story turns on Voldemort's face in that second. Not because of the danger, because of the insult. He had been the only one. For 50 years, in a world of thousands of wizards, the language of snakes had been the private proof that he was not like them. It was the first magic he ever found in himself, alone, in a room in an orphanage, and in front of 600 witnesses. His own snake had turned her head to somebody else's voice. He opened the sphere. 2 years of discipline. 2 years of never once letting her out, of feeding her through enchantment, of refusing every temptation to use her as a threat. And he threw it all away in 1 second because a 19-year-old boy had spoken to his snake and she had answered. The globe came apart like a soap bubble, and Nagini came out of the air at Harry Potter's throat. Neville Longbottom was already moving. He had been moving since Hermione stood up. He had gone over the backs of 4 rows of chairs, and he was at the end of the staff row when the sphere opened, and Minerva McGonagall did not need 3 seconds. She needed 1, because she had been holding her wand under her sleeve since 11 o'clock, and the trunk in her rooms 12 floors above was already unlocked. The sorting hat came down the length of the Great Hall through the air, scorched black down one side, and Neville caught it in both hands, and it was already heavier than a hat has any right to be. He pulled out the sword of Godric Gryffindor, and he cut Nagini out of the air 18 inches from Harry Potter's face. The sound she made went through the whole castle. Every window in the Great Hall broke at once. The 2 halves of her hit the platform, and something black and thin came out of her and screamed and was gone. And Lord Voldemort staggered. He had felt it 5 times before. He had felt the diary go, and the ring, and the locket, and the cup, and the crown. Each time it had been like a door slamming somewhere in a large house. This was not that. This was the last one. He had 6 pieces hidden, and now he had none. And for the first time since he was 16 years old, there was nothing standing between Lord Voldemort and the ordinary end of a life. Except there was. There was one more. It was standing 4 feet away from him with its wrists bound, and he had spent 2 years keeping it fed. And Severus Snape's entire terrible plan turned on one question, which was whether the most frightened man in the world would do arithmetic. He didn't. He turned, and he saw the sword and the hat, and Minerva McGonagall standing with her wand out, and he understood in one movement who had kept that hat in a trunk for 11 months and who had let it be kept. He looked at the man standing 2 paces behind him on the left. "You," he said. Severus Snape did not deny it. He did not try to run, and he did not raise his wand. I think he had been waiting for this specific second since 1981 and was mostly relieved that it had finally arrived. He said one word. Nobody agrees on what it was. Neville says it was a name. Then Voldemort killed him, and Severus Snape fell on the platform of the Great Hall of Hogwarts School. And the last thing he saw was Lily Evans's son standing 4 feet away. And nobody in the hall, except 4 people, had the first idea what they had just watched. And then Voldemort turned around, with the Elder Wand in his hand, and no soul left anywhere in the world but the one behind him. And he did the thing he had refused to do for 730 days. He killed Harry Potter. The hall went silent, in a way I do not think any room has ever been silent. Hermione Granger made a sound. Ginny Weasley was held up by her mother and her brother. Ron Weasley stood in the 4th row with his wand in his hand and did not move at all. Because Ron was the only one of them who had been told exactly what was supposed to happen next, and he was the only one who could not quite believe it either. Harry lay on the floor of the Great Hall for 11 seconds. Outside, at 4 minutes past 12, 11 standing stones went dark within 90 seconds of each other, and the wards along the coast of Britain came down for the first time in 2 years. And in Geneva, a very tired man called Kingsley Shacklebolt said one word into a fireplace. At the gates, Hagrid stood up out of the bracken. And in the Great Hall, Harry Potter opened his eyes. I have to be exact here, because it is the whole point. He did not survive because he was special. He survived because of a decision Lord Voldemort had made in a graveyard in 1995, when he cut a boy's arm and took his blood to build a body and carried Lily Potter's protection into his own veins and never once thought about what it was doing there. Voldemort had read that in a memory in February 1999. He had understood it perfectly. He had made a law about it, and then a snake had died in front of him, and he had forgotten every word. The piece of soul in Harry died on that floor. Harry did not, because the only man who could kill him was the man keeping him alive. He got up. 600 people watched Harry Potter stand up in the middle of the Great Hall, and the noise that came out of that room was not a cheer. It was something older than cheering. Neville threw him a wand. Cherry and unicorn hair, 13 inches, a bit unyielding, and it had belonged to Neville Longbottom since he was 17, and it worked for Harry immediately and completely, which Ollivander said afterwards was the least surprising thing he had heard in 80 years. What followed was not a long duel. Voldemort was mortal and knew it, and a mortal man with the most powerful wand ever made is still the most dangerous thing in the room. He took the platform apart. He put Bill Weasley through a wall. He held off Minerva McGonagall, Molly Weasley, Hermione Granger, and Harry Potter at once for a little under 2 minutes, and every second of it was the greatest display of magic anybody in that hall ever saw. Bellatrix Lestrange came off the side of the platform at Ginny Weasley and got about 6 feet before Molly Weasley put herself in the way and finished a duel that had been waiting since 1981. And Lord Voldemort, fighting 4 people, made the mistake he had always been going to make. He fixed on Harry. He always did. 17 years, and it was always going to end that way in that one respect. Everything else in the room stopped existing, and he drove Harry Potter backwards down the length of the Great Hall with the Elder Wand, and he did not look left, and he did not look left, and he did not look left. Ron Weasley came at him from the left. 2 years earlier, in that room, Ron had turned around and walked out of a door because it was the only sensible thing left to do, and he had carried it every day since. He was not stronger than Voldemort. He was never going to be stronger than Voldemort. He only had to be faster than him once. "Expelliarmus," said Ron Weasley. The Elder Wand came out of Lord Voldemort's hand and turned over twice in the air and slapped into Ron's palm. And it did not fight him, and it never fought him afterwards, because a wand like that does not care how famous you are. It cares who won. Voldemort snatched Bellatrix's wand off the floor and pointed it at Harry Potter and cast the killing curse for the 3rd time in one morning. Harry did not move. The curse hit him and did nothing at all. And in front of 600 people, Lord Voldemort finally, completely understood what he had done to himself in a graveyard 5 years earlier, and everybody in the hall saw the exact moment it arrived on his face. Harry raised Neville's wand. He did not use a killing curse. He never has, in any version of this, and I do not think he ever could. "Stupefy," he said. "It is a stunning spell. It is the first serious spell most children learn. It knocks a person off their feet and puts them to sleep, and it does not kill anybody, ever. It killed him." Because the body Lord Voldemort was standing in had been built out of bone and blood and a stolen hand and held together by a soul that was now entirely gone, and there was nothing left inside it to get up again. The red light hit him in the chest, and he went backwards off the end of the platform, and he did not move. The greatest dark wizard who ever lived was finished by a spell a first year can cast, because at the very end there was nothing special about him at all. Then the doors came off their hinges, and the war came in from outside. The rest of it took 9 days, and I will not spend long on it, because the interesting part of a regime is never how it ends. It ends fast. That is the whole lesson. A system built entirely on one man's ability to frighten people has nothing underneath it. And when the man is lying on the floor of a school hall, the thing simply falls in on itself. The doors came down at 8 minutes past 12, and Rubeus Hagrid came through them, and behind him came 240 people who had been waiting 2 years for exactly this. And behind them came the centaurs of the Forbidden Forest, who did not come in, but who did close the grounds, and nobody who ran for the trees that day reached the trees. Creature the house elf came up out of the kitchens at the head of every elf in the castle, holding a carving knife, and 41 Death Eaters discovered what happens when you spend 2 years being unpleasant to the people who bring your food. By 1 o'clock, the castle was taken. By 3, foreign wizards were coming through the coastal gaps in units. By nightfall, the ministry had surrendered because there was nothing left in it to surrender for. Augusta Longbottom walked out of a ministry holding cell on the 3rd of May under her own power and refused a chair. She was 87. She told her grandson that his hair was a disgrace, and then she held on to him in a corridor for a very long time. They found Lucius Malfoy in his own drawing room at Malfoy Manor. He had been alone in that house since the previous evening, when his wife and his son had walked out of the front door with 2 suitcases and a portkey the goblins had made for them and had not looked back. Narcissa and Draco Malfoy were in a house outside Bordeaux by the 2nd of May. They never came back to Britain. Draco Malfoy got a new wand from a French wand maker in the autumn of 2000, 10¼ inches, and it was not hawthorn, and by every account he never spoke about the old one to anyone for the rest of his life. The cost is the part that should not be rushed. Between the 2nd of May 1998 and the 2nd of May 2000, 493 witches and wizards died in Britain because of that regime, and about 9,000 lost their homes or their country, and there is not a family in the wizarding world that came out of those 2 years whole. Fred Weasley, Percy Weasley, Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks, whose son Teddy was 2 years old at the end of it, and was raised by his grandmother and by his godfather, who came to see him every single week for the rest of his childhood, and who never once missed. Colin Creevey, Phileas Flitwick, Aberforth Dumbledore, Marlowe, whose first name was Thomas and who deserves it written down, and Severus Snape. Harry Potter did not know a single thing about Severus Snape until the evening of the 3rd of May, when Hermione Granger sat him down in a room in the castle and put a stone basin in front of him and said, "Before you say anything about yesterday, you need to see this." He came out of it an hour later and went and sat on the steps outside for most of the night. What he did about it is the reason there is a portrait of Severus Snape in the headmaster's office at Hogwarts. Harry stood up in front of the whole Reconstruction Council in July and told them the entire story from beginning to end, including the parts that made Dumbledore look bad, and he did not soften any of it, and he got shouted at, and he did it again the following week. Kingsley Shacklebolt came home on the 4th of May and was made temporary Minister for Magic by a room of exhausted people who could not think of a single reason not to, and he held the job for 19 years. Horace Slughorn came out of his village in Wales in June, walked into the Reconstruction Council uninvited, and gave evidence for 2 days about a conversation he had had with a 16-year-old boy in 1943. He did not spare himself in any of it. He went back to teaching potions that September, and he was, by every account, a great deal better at it afterwards. Luna Lovegood spent the summer of 2000 as the only witch in Britain the centaurs would speak to, negotiating a treaty that nobody else could have got, and she was 20 years old and did most of it sitting on the ground. Mr. Ollivander reopened his shop in Diagon Alley on the 19th of August and sold 400 wands before Christmas, which is what happens when a country has spent 2 years confiscating them. Minerva McGonagall became headmistress in September 2000 and refused it twice first. The school reopened on schedule because it always does. That is the thing about Hogwarts. It has been burned and besieged and occupied, and it has never once failed to open on the 1st of September, and the ceiling of the Great Hall was mended over the summer of 2000 by 400 volunteers. And on the first night of term, it showed the sky again for the first time in 2 years, and 11-year-olds who had never seen it thought it had always been like that. Ron Weasley kept the Elder Wand for 6 days. He did not want it, and he was not tempted by it, and he told Harry it made his hand feel like it was holding somebody else's opinion. On the 8th of May, he took it out to the edge of the lake with Harry and Hermione and Ginny, and he broke it across his knee, the way Bellatrix Lestrange had once broken a borrowed elm wand in a forest, and he threw both halves as far out into the water as he could. "That was the most powerful wand in the world," said Hermione. "Yes," said Ron, "and every single person who ever owned it got killed for it, including the last one, and he was the best there has ever been." He watched the ripples. "I would rather have my own." The invisibility cloak was found in Voldemort's rooms in the tower and went back to Harry because it had been in his family for a very long time. And the third thing was never recovered, and here is why. In April 2000, in a sealed room under the dungeons, Harry Potter finally became completely certain that he was going to die. And a small golden snitch that he had carried in his pocket since the 2nd of May 1998 opened. I am not going to describe what he saw. It was his, and it lasted about 10 minutes, and there were 6 of them, and they stayed until he said he was ready. When they had gone, he put the little black stone on the floor and pushed it under the bed with his foot because he had thought about it for 2 years and had decided that a stone that brings back the dead is not a thing that should be walking around in the world in anybody's pocket. The lower level of Hogwarts was sealed again in the summer of 2000 on Harry's request, and as far as anybody knows, the resurrection stone is still on the floor of a room with 411 stones in the ceiling under a school full of children who have never heard of it. Harry Potter carried 2 broken pieces of a holly wand and a cloth in his pocket for 4 years afterwards and never had them mended because Ollivander said honestly that it could not be done properly, and Harry did not want it done improperly. He got a new wand in 1999, in the sense that Neville Longbottom gave him one in the middle of a battle, and then flatly refused to take it back. He used it for the rest of his life. He and Ginny were married in the summer of 2002, and Ron and Hermione the following spring, and the burrow was rebuilt on the same foundations with 1 extra room. And if you ask any of them about the 2 years, they mostly change the subject. Every 2nd of May, there is a service at Hogwarts, and it is quiet, and there are no speeches. And in the whole of that world, from the 1st of May, 1998, to the last day any of them lived, not one single person ever knew why it had happened. They did not know about a chandelier in a drawing room, or 4 seconds of darkness, or a boy's hand reaching out for a wand and closing on the wrong one. They did not know that a woman had stepped in front of her son, the way a mother does without deciding to, and that a 10-inch hawthorn wand had stayed in the hand of a frightened 17-year-old, and that everything else, all 493 of them, all 2 years of it, had grown out of that. She never knew either. She spent the rest of her life in a house outside Bordeaux, and she was, in the end, one of the few people in this entire story who got exactly what she wanted. Her son was alive, and he was somewhere else. That is where I am going to leave it. If this one got you, the next timeline is one I have wanted to do for a while, and it starts with a letter that never gets sent. Tell me in the comments which moment you would have changed, because I read every one of them, and one of them is going to be the next video.